My name is Hattie Marshall, 68 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years treating my son-in-law Paul like my own child. That all changed last month when my daughter Stephanie looked me straight in the eyes while signing inheritance papers and said those words I'll never forget. "You're not family, you only stayed because it was convenient." As I tell you what happened that day, let me know where you're watching from. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button while I explain how my daughter learned what real family means. The economic crash of 2008 was a pivotal moment in my life. My husband Richard had just passed away after 40 years of marriage, leaving me alone to run our small furniture store in Portland. It wasn't a fancy business, just a modest shop specializing in handcrafted wooden pieces that Richard had built with his talented hands over the decades. Suddenly, I was a widow at 53 trying to figure out life without my partner while keeping his legacy alive. My daughter Stephanie was 21 at the time, studying business administration at Portland State University. She was our only child, and Richard and I had poured everything into giving her opportunities we never had. She was always bright and ambitious, but also somewhat entitled. I noticed it even when she was young, but Richard would dismiss it as her simply knowing what she wanted. Now that I look back, I should have paid more attention to those early warning signs. It was during her junior year that Stephanie met Paul Turner in one of her marketing classes. Paul came from a working-class family in Ohio. His father was a carpenter who taught him everything about woodworking, which immediately created a connection when I first met him. He reminded me so much of Richard when he was younger, hardworking, humble, and genuinely passionate about craftsmanship. They married quickly just 6 months after meeting. I was concerned about the rush, but they seemed happy, and I was glad Stephanie had found someone during such a difficult time for our family. They struggled financially at first, both still in school with mounting student loans. I wanted to help them start their married life without the burden of additional debt, so I offered to help them buy their first small house with an interest-free loan. It wasn't much, but it was everything I could spare from my savings while still keeping the store afloat. "Mom, we'll pay you back every penny, I promise," Stephanie had said, hugging me tightly. I believed her completely at the time. Paul started helping at the store on weekends while finishing his degree. He showed a natural talent for furniture design that even surpassed Richard's. Customers would come in specifically asking for his pieces. It wasn't long before I offered him a full-time position after graduation. "I'd be honored, Hattie," he'd said, his eyes bright with excitement. "I promise I'll make you and the business proud." Over the next few years, I watched Paul pour his heart and soul into the store. He'd stay late sketching new designs, talking with customers, and learning every aspect of the business. Meanwhile, Stephanie landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm downtown and became increasingly distant from both of us. She'd come home late, barely acknowledging the growth Paul was bringing to what was now becoming our family business. I found myself developing a close bond with Paul. We'd often stay after closing, sharing coffee and stories about Richard. I taught Paul everything I knew about running the business side of things, and he taught me about modern design trends and new woodworking techniques. He became the son I never had, filling a void in my heart that had been empty since Richard's passing. "You've become family to me, Paul," I told him one evening as we were closing up. The look of gratitude in his eyes nearly brought me to tears. "That means more than you know, Hattie. My own parents are gone now, and you've been more supportive than they ever were." As our relationship grew stronger, I noticed Stephanie's attitude changing. She'd make snide comments when Paul and I would discuss business matters at family dinners. "You two sure spend a lot of time together," she'd say with a tight smile. "Should I be worried?" Paul would laugh it off, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. There was nothing inappropriate about our relationship. I was 30 years his senior and thought of him purely as a son. But Stephanie's jealousy began creating tension in their marriage. She seemed to resent the business connection we shared, perhaps because she had chosen a different path that didn't include her father's legacy. By the 5th year of their marriage, Stephanie had been promoted twice and was making significantly more money than Paul, a fact she never hesitated to mention during arguments. I started noticing a pattern of behavior that concerned me. She valued status and material things above the connections that truly matter in life. It was so different from the values Richard and I had tried to instill in her. I remember wondering where I had gone wrong in raising her, what I could have done differently to help her appreciate the things that truly matter in life. But at the same time, I was grateful that Paul had entered our lives, bringing with him the work ethic and heart that reminded me so much of Richard. Little did I know that the dynamics in our family were about to shift, dramatically testing bonds that I thought were unbreakable. What began as Richard's small furniture store gradually evolved into a thriving business thanks to Paul's innovative designs and dedication. 5 years after he joined full-time, our annual revenue had tripled. We expanded from our original location to a larger showroom downtown with a workshop in the back where Paul could create his pieces. "This wouldn't have been possible without you," I told him on the day we cut the ribbon on the new location. "Richard would have been so proud to see what you've done with his legacy." Paul had tears in his eyes as he hugged me. "I just wish he could have been here to see it." The biggest game changer came when Paul suggested launching an online store. I was hesitant at first. At my age, technology didn't come naturally, but Paul was patient, explaining everything step by step. He hired a professional photographer to capture his pieces in the best light and created a website that showcased the craftsmanship in each item. Within 3 months of launching, online sales accounted for 40% of our business. "We're shipping to California, New York, even international orders now," Paul announced one morning, scrolling through the orders on his laptop. "We might need to hire another craftsman soon." Watching Paul grow the business was like watching Richard all over again, that same passion and integrity in everything he did. He learned every aspect of the operation, from sourcing the finest sustainable woods to managing the books. I gradually stepped back, allowing him to take over the day-to-day operations, while I served more as a mentor and advisor. Stephanie, on the other hand, never showed much interest in how the furniture business operated. She'd ask about profits occasionally and would beam with pride when telling her colleagues and friends about our family business, but she never took the time to understand what went into creating that success. The only thing that seemed to matter to her was the bottom line. "How much did we clear this quarter?" became her standard greeting when visiting the store, rather than asking about new designs or customer feedback. She treated the business like an investment portfolio rather than her father's legacy. One evening, as Paul and I were reviewing quarterly financials in my home office, I decided to address the elephant in the room. "Have you noticed that Stephanie never asks about the actual work we do? Only the profits." Paul shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "She's always been focused on numbers. That's her background, after all." "But this isn't just any business. It's her father's legacy, your creative work, our family's future." He sighed deeply, removing his glasses to rub his eyes. "I know, we've had some arguments about it. She wants me to focus more on the profitable lines and less on the custom work I enjoy. Says I'm wasting time on pieces that don't generate enough margin." That was the first glimpse I had into the growing discord in their marriage. They presented a united front in public, but behind closed doors, their values were increasingly divergent. Paul valued craftsmanship, quality, and customer relationships. Stephanie valued efficiency, profit margins, and social status. It was around this time that my old friend Dorothy came back into my life. We had grown up together in the same neighborhood, but life took us in different directions. She had recently moved back to Portland after retiring from her banking career in Chicago. Over lunch one day, I confided in her about my concerns. "The store is doing better than ever, but I worry about what will happen when I'm gone. Stephanie and Paul have such different visions for its future." Dorothy, ever practical after 40 years in finance, asked a question that had never occurred to me. "Have you updated your will since the business expanded? Do you have succession plans in place?" I hadn't. My will still left everything equally to Stephanie, with no provisions for Paul or the business. Dorothy recommended her estate attorney, suggesting I protect both Paul's role in the company and the business itself. "Family businesses can tear families apart if proper planning isn't in place," she warned. "I've seen it happen too many times." The next week, I met with James Montgomery, a soft-spoken but sharp-minded attorney who specialized in family business succession. He asked probing questions about my wishes for the business, my assessment of both Stephanie and Paul's capabilities, and my ultimate goals. "It sounds like you want to ensure the business continues with its current values intact, while also providing for your daughter," he summarized. "But you're concerned about potential conflict between their different approaches." "Exactly," I confirmed. "I love my daughter, but I don't trust her vision for the business. And though Paul isn't blood, he embodies everything Richard valued." James took detailed notes. "We can create a structure that protects both the business and family relationships. Let me work up some options for you to consider." What I didn't tell him was how Stephanie's attitude toward me had been changing as the business became more successful. Her visits became less frequent, her calls shorter. When we did speak, she would subtly drop hints about planning for the future and modernizing the business approach. Phrases that felt oddly threatening coming from someone who had shown so little interest in the day-to-day operations. I couldn't shake the feeling that she saw me as merely a placeholder, someone temporarily holding assets that she considered rightfully hers. The thought broke my heart, but I couldn't ignore the signs. The daughter I raised was watching the calendar, waiting for her inheritance rather than valuing the time we had left together. One night, after a particularly tense family dinner where Stephanie had questioned some of our business decisions, Paul stayed behind to help me clean up. "I'm sorry about tonight," he said quietly. "She's been under a lot of pressure at work." "Is it just work pressure, Paul? Or is there something else going on?" He was silent for a long moment, carefully arranging dishes in the dishwasher. "She's been talking more about taking over the business, making changes. She thinks we're too traditional." Traditional. Her word, not mine. She wants to scale up outsource production, focus on volume rather than craftsmanship. Everything Richard and Paul had built was about quality, not quantity. Each piece told a story, carried the maker's touch. What Stephanie was suggesting would destroy the very soul of the business. That night, I made a decision. I would protect Richard's legacy and Paul's future while still trying to guide Stephanie back to the values that really mattered. I just didn't realize how quickly I would need to act. The first sign that Stephanie was serious about changing the business came during a rare visit she made to the workshop. She arrived unexpectedly one Tuesday afternoon in her sleek business suit, looking out of place among the sawdust and unfinished furniture. Paul was in the middle of showing me a new joinery technique he was using for a custom dining table when she walked in. "Mom, Paul saw," she said with a tight smile. "I thought I'd stop by to see how things are running." Paul brightened immediately. "Perfect timing. I was just showing Hattie this new technique that eliminates the need for metal fasteners. Want to see?" Stephanie glanced at the half-finished table with barely concealed disinterest. "Actually, I was hoping to talk about staffing. Have you considered outsourcing some of the basic production work? It would free up capital for expansion." The basic production work she referred to was being done by Thomas and Lloyd, two craftsmen who had worked alongside Richard for over 20 years. They were family to us, not line items on a budget sheet. "We don't outsource craftsmanship," I replied more sharply than intended. "These pieces are made by skilled artisans who take pride in their work." "Mom, that's charming, but outdated thinking. Every successful furniture company uses overseas manufacturing now. We could triple production and cut costs by 60%. Paul put down his tools. "Stephanie, our customers come to us specifically because we don't mass produce. They want pieces made by hand here in Portland by people they can meet." "And they'll still think that's what they're getting," she countered. "We just need the right marketing approach." I was stunned by her suggestion that we essentially lie to our customers. "That's not how your father built this business, and it's not how we run it now. Dad's been gone for 10 years, Mom. Times change, businesses adapt or die." The conversation deteriorated from there, with Stephanie presenting a full modernization plan that included firing our long-term employees, converting the workshop into a showroom, and manufacturing all our products in Vietnam. When Paul and I both firmly rejected these ideas, she left in a huff, muttering something about sentimentality over sense. That night, Paul called me, his voice tight with stress. "We had a huge fight after the meeting. She says I've turned you against her, that I'm trying to steal her inheritance." "That's absurd," I said. "You're the one who's grown the business while honoring its values." "She doesn't see it that way. She thinks I've been manipulating you for years, positioning myself to take over what should be hers." A week later, Stephanie asked to meet me for lunch alone. She was all smiles and charm, a complete turnaround from her behavior at the workshop. After some small talk about her work and a neighborhood charity event, she finally revealed her agenda. "Mom, I've been thinking about the business and your retirement. You've worked so hard for so long. Wouldn't it be nice to fully retire and let me handle the business aspects while Paul continues the creative side?" "I'm not ready to fully step away, son," I said carefully. "I still enjoy being involved." "Of course, but legally transferring ownership now would save significantly on inheritance taxes later. My financial advisor says we could structure it as a gift." There it was. She wasn't concerned about my retirement. She wanted control of the business while I was still alive. I made non-committal noises about looking into it while internally my alarm bells were ringing loudly. The very next day, I received a concerning call from Margaret, our bookkeeper of 15 years. Hattie, I'm not wanting to get involved in family matters, she began hesitantly. But Stephanie was here yesterday asking a lot of questions about the business valuation and your personal finances. She wanted to see documentation I'm not comfortable sharing without your authorization. What specifically was she asking about? Your retirement accounts, property deeds, the business insurance policies. She mentioned something about a succession plan she was working on with an attorney. An attorney I knew nothing about? My daughter was making plans for my business, my property, and effectively my life, without my knowledge or consent. The betrayal cut deep. 2 days later, Thomas, our senior craftsman, pulled me aside during lunch break. Mrs. M, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I overheard Stephanie on the phone yesterday when she thought the workshop was empty. She was talking to someone about elder care facilities. Mentioned something about you needing more care than she can provide and accessing equity in the business. My blood ran cold. Stephanie was planning to declare me incompetent and take control of everything. I was perfectly healthy and sharp as ever, but she was laying groundwork to suggest otherwise. That evening, I began recording all my conversations as a precaution and kept a detailed journal of all business decisions and interactions. If my daughter was planning to question my mental capacity, I would have evidence to the contrary. The final confirmation came from an unexpected source. Paul came to my house late one night, clearly distraught. Hattie, I found something on Stephanie's computer, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She left her laptop open while she was in the shower. There was an email exchange with a lawyer about having you declared mentally unfit to run the business. They're discussing a transition of control once you're placed in assisted living. Paul looked devastated. I had no idea she was planning this. I swear to you, Hattie, she's been acting strange, focused on money and status, but this is something else entirely. I reached out and took his hand. I believe you, Paul, and I've been gathering evidence about this for weeks now, but I need to know, where do you stand in all this? He looked me straight in the eyes. With you, Hattie, always with you. What Stephanie is doing goes against everything I believe in, everything your husband stood for. I can't support it, even if she is my wife. That night, after Paul left, I made a phone call to James Montgomery, my attorney. James, I need to accelerate our plans. Things have taken a turn I didn't anticipate. How quickly do we need to move, Hattie? Immediately. My daughter is planning to have me declared incompetent. I need protection, and I need it now. There was a pause on the line. Come to my office first thing tomorrow. Bring any evidence you've collected. We're going to make sure that doesn't happen. As I hung up, I felt a profound sadness. How had it come to this, my only child plotting against me for money and control? But beneath the sadness was a steely resolve. Stephanie had underestimated me badly. She thought I was a sentimental old woman who would be easily manipulated. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. The next morning, I arrived at James Montgomery's office with my evidence neatly organized in a leather portfolio: recordings, journal entries, emails forwarded by concerned employees, and notes from conversations with Paul. James reviewed everything methodically, his expression growing more grave with each document. This is concerning, Hattie. Very concerning, he said, finally removing his reading glasses. Your daughter appears to be building a case to petition for conservatorship, using your age as leverage despite your obvious mental clarity. Can she succeed, Mom? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Not with this evidence contradicting her claims, but we need to act preemptively. The legal structure we discussed for the business needs to be implemented immediately. Over the next 4 hours, James outlined a comprehensive plan to protect both me and the business. It was more complex than our original discussions, but necessary given the urgency of the situation. We'll create a tiered approach, he explained, sketching a diagram. First, we establish a revocable trust with you as the grantor and trustee while you're alive and competent. This trust will hold all your personal assets, your home investments, personal accounts. He drew another box on the paper. Second, we create a separate business entity, a limited liability company that will actually own the furniture business. The LLC will have an operating agreement with specific succession provisions. And Stephanie? I asked quietly. James gave me a compassionate look. That's where the strategy becomes crucial. We'll create a set of decoy documents, papers that Stephanie will believe transfer eventual control to her. They'll look legitimate, but legally, they'll be superseded by the trust and LLC structures we establish first. Isn't that deceptive? The idea made me uncomfortable despite Stephanie's actions. It's protective, James corrected gently. You're not doing this to hurt Stephanie or deny her an inheritance. You're doing it to prevent her from taking control inappropriately and dismantling a legacy business while you're still very much able to make your own decisions. Over the next 2 weeks, I made daily visits to James's office, signing document after document, establishing the complex legal framework that would protect everything Richard and I had built. The furniture business was legally transferred into the new LLC structure, with carefully crafted operating agreements that prioritized craftsmanship, employee retention, and sustainable business practices. What about Paul? I asked during one of our final sessions. I want to protect his role in the business. We can name him as the successor manager of the LLC, James suggested. But are you certain you want to do that? He is married to Stephanie after all. It was a valid concern. I believe in Paul's integrity, I said after considering it. But I also want to test it. Let's build in conditions, requirements that maintain the business values before he can receive any ownership interest. We structured the succession plan so that Paul would have operational control of the business, but actual ownership would remain in the trust with strict provisions about business practices, employee retention, and quality standards. If those standards weren't maintained, control would shift to a management committee, including several long-term employees. There's one more thing, James said during our final meeting. We need to consider what happens when Stephanie realizes what we've done. She'll be furious. I acknowledged my heart heavy with the reality of how far my relationship with my daughter had deteriorated. Beyond furious, she may threaten legal action. We need to be prepared. That's when James suggested we compile a comprehensive record of Stephanie's actions, evidence that would make any judge question her motives if she contested the arrangements. It's not about embarrassing her, he assured me. It's about having protection if needed. I nodded through the thought of using such evidence against my own daughter filled me with sadness. How had we reached this point? During this intensive legal process, I maintained a careful facade of normalcy. I continued going to the store meeting with customers, reviewing designs with Paul. Stephanie made occasional appearances, each time dropping hints about simplifying my affairs and reducing my stress by transitioning responsibilities. I would nod and smile while inwardly strengthening my resolve. She had no idea what I was actually doing behind the scenes. One unexpected complication arose when Paul noticed my frequent absences and distracted manner. "Is everything all right, Hattie?" he asked one afternoon as we were closing the shop. "You seem preoccupied lately." I considered telling him everything, but hesitated. While I believed in his loyalty to me and the business, I needed to be absolutely certain. The final arrangement would test where his true allegiance lay, with the values of the business or with his wife's ambitions. "Just some estate planning," I said vaguely, "making sure everything's in order." He gave me a searching look but didn't press further. I felt guilty for the partial truth but reassured myself it was necessary. Everyone would know the full plan soon enough. The day finally came when James called to inform me that all the legal structures were in place and properly filed. "Everything is secure, Hattie. The business is protected in the LLC, your personal assets are in the trust, and the succession plan is legally binding. And the decoy documents for Stephanie, ready for signing. They appear to give her eventual control of everything, but legally they're subordinate to the structures we've already established. Once she signs them thinking she's securing her inheritance, the trap will be set." I winced at his choice of words. "It's not a trap, James. It's not a trap. It's a lesson, a necessary one, but still a lesson." "Of course," he amended. "When would you like to schedule the signing?" "Let's do it on Thursday," I decided. "I'll tell Stephanie it's about updating my will and business succession plan. She'll be eager to attend." That night, I sat alone in my living room looking at old family photos. Stephanie as a toddler riding on Richard's shoulders, her high school graduation, her wedding day with Paul. Where had that loving, bright-eyed girl gone? When had money and status become more important than family and integrity? As I prepared for bed, I found myself hoping that what was to come might actually serve as a wake-up call, that seeing the consequences of her actions might bring my real daughter back to me. It was probably naive, but a mother's hope dies hard. Little did I know that the confrontation would be even more painful than I anticipated, and the words exchanged would cut deeper than any legal document ever could. Thursday arrived with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit that Richard had always said made me look distinguished. Pearl earrings, minimal makeup, hair neatly styled. I wanted to project confidence and composure for what was to come. James's office was located in a historic building downtown, all polished wood and gleaming brass fixtures. I arrived 30 minutes early to review the final documents and prepare myself emotionally. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" James asked, concern evident in his voice. "It's not too late to take a different approach." "I'm sure," I replied firmly. "Stephanie needs to understand there are consequences to her actions. This isn't just about money or control, it's about values, integrity, and respecting the business her father built." At precisely 2 o'clock, the receptionist announced Stephanie and Paul's arrival. My daughter strode in, confidently dressed in an expensive designer suit, her hair and makeup flawless. Paul followed more hesitantly, looking uncomfortable in his rarely worn dress clothes. I could tell he sensed something significant was happening, though he didn't know what. "Mom," Stephanie greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that never reached her eyes. "You look nice." Very formal for a simple document signing. "Some occasions call for proper attire," I replied evenly. James welcomed them both and invited us into the conference room where the documents were arranged neatly on the polished mahogany table. He began with a practiced introduction about ensuring proper succession and inheritance, while Stephanie nodded approvingly. "As we discussed, Miss Marshall," James continued smoothly, "these documents outline the transfer of both personal assets and business interests upon your passing, or in the event of incapacity." Stephanie straightened in her chair, barely concealing her eagerness. Paul looked increasingly uncomfortable, shifting his weight and avoiding eye contact with anyone. James slid the first document across the table, one of our decoy documents that appeared to name Stephanie as the primary beneficiary and successor to the business. This first agreement establishes Stephanie Marshall Turner as the sole beneficiary of all personal and business assets. James explained the perfect picture of professional detachment. Stephanie couldn't contain her smile as she quickly signed where it indicated, not bothering to read the fine print that stated this document was subject to all prior established trusts and business entities. "And this one?" she asked, reaching for the next document. "This establishes the transition of business management in the event of Hattie's incapacity," James explained. Another decoy, this one appearing to give Stephanie immediate control if I was declared unable to manage my affairs. She signed it even more quickly than the first, her signature an eager scrawl across the page. Paul watched silently, his expression inscrutable. When the final decoy document was signed, Stephanie sat back with a satisfied smile. That's when she turned to me with a look I'll never forget. A look of triumph, as if she'd won some long-contested battle. "I know this is hard, Mom," she said with false sympathy. "Giving up control isn't easy at your age. But it's for the best. Paul and I will take good care of everything you and Dad built." Paul flinched visibly at being included in this statement, but remained silent. "Will you?" I asked quietly. "Of course." Stephanie continued, her voice taking on a patronizing tone. "We'll modernize operations, expand the brand, really take it to the next level. All those outdated practices you've insisted on keeping, the handcrafting, the small batch production, will streamline everything." Against my wishes, I stated not as a question, but as a fact. "Your wishes are sentimental, Mom. Business requires practical thinking. And what about the employees? Thomas and Lloyd have been with us for over 20 years. Stephanie waved her hand dismissively. "They'll receive fair severance packages. It's nothing personal, just business evolution." "Nothing personal," I repeated softly. "Is that how you see family too?" "As something to be evolved past when convenient." Her expression hardened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I've known for months what you've been planning, Stephanie. The consultations with lawyers about having me declared incompetent, the research into care facilities. The questions to staff about my mental state. The color drained from her face. Who told you that? It was Paul, wasn't it? She turned to her husband accusingly. You've always been more loyal to her than to me. Paul finally spoke. I didn't know about any care facility plans until recently, but yes, I told her when I found out. Stephanie's face contorted with anger. Of course you did. You've been positioning yourself from day one, worming your way into the business, making yourself indispensable. You're not even family. You only stayed because it was convenient. A ready-made career handed to you on a silver platter. The room fell silent at her outburst. The words hung in the air like poison. Not family. I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. Paul has embodied every value your father and I tried to instill in you. He's shown loyalty, integrity, and genuine care for the legacy we built. If that's not family, I don't know what is. Stephanie's laugh was cold. Blood is family, Mom. Everything else is convenience or strategy. I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, I didn't recognize my own child. The girl we raised would never have said such things. Without another word, I turned to James and nodded. He slid one final document across the table to me, the actual binding document that would activate the protections we'd established. I signed it deliberately, my hand steady despite the emotional turmoil inside me. What's that? Stephanie demanded. Just finalizing everything? I said quietly, standing to leave. Don't you need me to sign it too? No, I replied simply. This one's just for me. I gathered my purse and walked to the door, pausing only briefly to look back at my daughter and son-in-law. Paul looked stricken, torn between loyalty to his wife and what he clearly felt was right. Stephanie merely looked suspicious and irritated. James will explain everything. I said, then walked out in silence, my heart breaking with every step. Behind me, I heard James begin, Ms. Turner, there are some additional details about the arrangements that you should be aware of. I didn't stay to witness her reaction. Some things are too painful to watch even when necessary. Instead, I walked slowly to my car, sat behind the wheel, and finally allowed myself to cry for everything that had been lost. Not material possessions, but something far more precious, the daughter I thought I knew. For 3 weeks following the meeting at James's office, I heard nothing from Stephanie. Paul called several times, his voice tight with concern, but I assured him I was fine and suggested he focus on navigating his own relationship with my daughter. I knew she must have discovered the truth by now, and her silence spoke volumes about her reaction. I kept to my routine, visiting the store, meeting with customers, having lunch with my friend Dorothy, who provided much-needed emotional support during this difficult time. You did what you had to do, she assured me over tea. Sometimes love means setting boundaries even with our children. Then on a rainy Tuesday morning, it happened. My phone rang with Stephanie's number flashing on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering. Hello, Stephanie. What have you done? Her voice was ice cold. I just got a letter from the bank. Something about a trust and an LLC. The branch manager says I have no authority over any of the business accounts. That's correct, I replied calmly. I've restructured the business ownership and my personal assets. You tricked me. The accusation was sharp. Those papers at the lawyer's office were fake. Not fake, just not the complete picture. Perhaps you should have read them more carefully instead of rushing to sign away my supposed incompetence. I'm calling my lawyer. This won't stand. You're welcome to do that, I said evenly. James has all the documentation about your plans to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized against my will. Would you like that presented in court? Silence stretched between us. Finally, she spoke again, her voice slightly less confident. What exactly have you done with the business? I've protected it. From being dismantled, from losing its values, from being turned into something your father would never recognize. It's my inheritance. No, Stephanie. It's your father's legacy. There's a difference. And you've made it abundantly clear you don't understand or respect that difference. So you're giving everything to Paul. The bitterness in her voice was palpable. I'm not giving anything to anyone just yet. I'm still very much alive and in control, but I have established a succession plan that ensures the business will continue operating according to certain principles. I'm your daughter. Her voice cracked slightly. Your only child? Yes, you are. Yes. And I love you, but I don't trust your judgment or your intentions regarding the business. You've demonstrated that clearly. Before she could respond, I continued. Paul hasn't been informed about the details yet. I'd like him to come to my house tomorrow at 10 for a private meeting. You are not invited. You can't exclude me from discussions about my family business. I can and I am. This meeting is for Paul alone. After that, he can share what he wishes with you. I hung up before she could protest further. My hands were shaking, but I felt a sense of calm resolve. The hardest part was over. Stephanie knew she hadn't succeeded in her plans. Now came the next phase, determining whether Paul truly deserved the trust I was placing in him. The following morning, Paul arrived precisely at 10, looking anxious and uncertain. I welcomed him with a hug and led him to the kitchen where I'd prepared coffee and his favorite cinnamon rolls. Stephanie's furious, he said as soon as we sat down. She's been calling lawyers nonstop. I expected as much. Has she told you what she discovered? Only that you've put everything in some kind of trust that she can't access? Is that true? I nodded. Among other things, Paul, I need to ask you something important and I need complete honesty. He met my gaze steadily. Always, Hattie. Did you know the extent of Stephanie's plans about having me declared incompetent and placed in a facility? Pain crossed his features. Not initially. I knew she wanted more control of the business, but the rest, I only discovered it recently when I found emails on her computer. That's when I came to you. And if she had succeeded, if she had gained control and started firing employees, outsourcing production, changing everything Richard built. He was quiet for a long moment. I would have fought her on it. I've tried to make her understand what makes the business special, but she only sees numbers and growth potential. He sighed deeply. I love my wife Hattie, but I don't love what she's become. The ambition, the focus on status and money above everything else, it's changing her. I nodded, satisfied with his answer. Paul, I've asked James to join us. He'll be here shortly to explain the legal arrangements I've made. When James arrived, he laid out the details methodically. The furniture business was now owned by an LLC, which in turn was owned by my revocable trust. Upon my death, or if I chose to retire, operational control of the business would transfer to Paul, provided he maintained specific standards and values outlined in the operating agreement. What about ownership? Paul asked, looking confused. The ownership remains with the trust, James explained. But as operating manager, you would receive significant profit participation. However, there are strict conditions. Those conditions included maintaining the handcrafted nature of the products, retaining key employees, continuing to source materials ethically, and upholding the quality standards Richard had established. Violation of these conditions would trigger a review by a management committee. And Stephanie? Paul asked quietly. Stephanie receives my personal assets, the house investments insurance policies. She also receives a non-controlling interest in the business that provides her with income, but not decision-making authority. Paul looked stunned. You're trusting me with Richard's legacy over your own daughter. I'm trusting you to uphold the values that make the business worth preserving. I corrected gently. This isn't about choosing you over Stephanie. It's about protecting something precious from someone who doesn't understand its true value. She's going to see it as a betrayal, he said, voicing the concern that had weighed on me for months. Perhaps initially, perhaps, but my hope is that eventually she'll understand why I made this choice. I reached across the table and took his hand. Paul, you don't have to accept this responsibility. If you feel it would damage your marriage beyond repair, I can modify the arrangements. He shook his head slowly. No, the business deserves to be protected. Richard deserves that. The employees deserve that. He squeezed my hand. I accept, Hattie, and I promise to uphold everything Richard built. As James gathered his papers to leave, Paul asked one more question. What happens when Stephanie takes legal action? She's already consulting with attorneys. James smiled slightly. She's welcome to try. But considering the evidence we have of her plans to have Hattie declared incompetent against medical evidence, any judge would be highly skeptical of her motives. Not to mention, everything Hattie has done is perfectly legal. After James left, Paul and I sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of what had transpired settling between us. "What do I tell her?" he finally asked. "The truth. That her father's legacy will continue as he intended. That she'll be well provided for but won't be able to dismantle what we've built." Paul nodded slowly. "It won't be an easy conversation." "No," I agreed, "but necessary ones rarely are." As he was leaving, Paul hugged me tightly. "Thank you for trusting me, Hattie. I won't let you down." I watched him drive away, knowing he was heading toward a confrontation that might end his marriage. The guilt was substantial, but so was my certainty that I'd done what needed to be done. Some lessons come at a terrible price, but that doesn't make them any less necessary. What I didn't anticipate was just how spectacular Stephanie's reaction would be, or that her attempt at revenge would backfire in such a public and definitive way. 3 days after my meeting with Paul, the storm finally broke. I was at the store helping a customer select wood samples for a custom dining table when Stephanie burst through the front door, her face flushed with anger. Paul, who had been working in the office, immediately came out when he heard the commotion. "How dare you come in here acting like everything's normal, Cindy," she shouted, drawing the attention of everyone in the showroom. "After what you've done." I calmly excused myself from the customer and approached my daughter. "Stephanie, this isn't the place. We can talk about this privately." "Oh, now you want privacy. After you've embarrassed me with every bank in town. After you've turned my own husband against me." Paul stepped forward. "Steph, please, not here." She whirled on him. "And you accepting control of my family business behind my back? Was this your plan all along? Cozy up to my mother, push me aside, take everything for yourself." By now, customers were either watching uncomfortably or quietly slipping out the door. Thomas and Lloyd had emerged from the workshop, concern evident on their weathered faces. "Stephanie, that's enough," I said firmly. "You're making accusations that have no basis in reality." "No basis?" She laughed bitterly. "You've disinherited your only daughter in favor of, what, an employee? A glorified carpenter who married into money?" Paul flinched as if struck. "That's not what happened, and you know it. I know that the two of you have been plotting behind my back. I know that my mother apparently trusts you more than her own flesh and blood." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "This isn't about trust, Stephanie. It's about protecting the business and what it stands for. It's my inheritance." Her voice had risen to a near scream. "No," I said quietly but firmly, "it's your father's legacy. There's a difference. And you've made it abundantly clear you don't respect that legacy. Because I want to modernize an outdated business model. Because I see potential you're too stubborn to acknowledge. Because you were planning to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized so you could take control." I replied, my voice steady. "Because you were willing to destroy your father's life's work for profit margins." The showroom fell completely silent. Several employees exchanged shocked glances. Stephanie's face drained of color. "That's a lie." "I have the emails, Stephanie. The consultations with lawyers, the inquiries to care facilities. Paul found them and showed them to me." She turned to Paul, betrayal written across her features. "You went through my private emails." "It was an accident," he said quietly. "Your laptop was open. But once I saw what you were planning, yes, I told your mother. Yes, I told your—" "How could I not?" Thomas stepped forward, his weathered face lined with concern. "Ms. Stephanie, is that true? You were going to put Mrs. M in a home against her will." Stephanie looked around, suddenly aware of her audience. Loyal employees who had known her since childhood, customers who had been coming to the store for years. The public mask she'd cultivated so carefully was slipping, revealing something ugly beneath. "You don't understand." she said, her voice now defensive. Mom is getting older. The business is getting more complex. It was just contingency planning. Contingency planning that you hid from me, I pointed out. That you discussed with lawyers, but not with your own mother. She had no answer for that. Stephanie, I said more gently, I've always intended to provide for you. The house, the investment, substantial income from the business. They're all yours eventually. What I won't allow is the destruction of everything your father and I built. By giving control to him, she pointed accusingly at Paul, by ensuring the business continues according to the principles that made it successful in the first place. Paul understands those principles. You've made it clear you don't. She stared at me for a long moment, then at Paul, then at the employees and customers watching uncomfortably. Something shifted in her expression. The public humiliation seemingly worse to her than the actual issue at hand. This isn't over, she said coldly. I'm calling my lawyer right now. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Stephanie, please. This doesn't have to destroy our relationship. We can talk about this rationally. She paused at the door and said, You chose him over me, your employee over your daughter. There's nothing more to talk about. After she left, the showroom remained silent for several uncomfortable moments. Finally, Thomas spoke up. Mrs. M, we're all behind you, 100%. Lloyd and the other employees nodded in agreement. Paul looked devastated. I should go after her, he said quietly. Give her some time to cool down. I advised, though, I wondered if any amount of time would be sufficient. That evening, James called to inform me that Stephanie had indeed contacted a lawyer who had reached out to him. I explained our documentation regarding her plans, he said, made it clear that challenging your arrangements would mean all of that evidence would become part of the public record. And her lawyer advised her to accept the arrangements. The potential damage to her professional reputation if her plans became public knowledge was too great a risk. I felt no satisfaction at this news, only sadness. So it's over. Legally, yes, but I suspect the personal fallout is just beginning. He was right. The following day, Paul called to tell me he had moved out of their house and into a hotel. She gave me an ultimatum, refuse the position you offered or our marriage is over. Oh, Paul, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to come between you. This isn't your fault, Hattie. Stephanie and we've been growing apart for years. Different values, different priorities. This situation just brought it all to the surface. A week later, Dorothy invited me to lunch at our favorite cafe, her expression serious as she stirred her tea. Have you heard the latest about Stephanie? My heart sank. No, what now? She's been telling people in her social circle that you're experiencing early dementia and have been manipulated by Paul. She's positioning herself as the concerned daughter, trying to protect you from exploitation. The irony would have been almost laughable if it weren't so painful. She's that desperate to save face. Dorothy nodded grimly. Appearances mean everything in her world. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visit at home. James arrived with a thick folder and a determined expression. We need to end this before it escalates further, he said without preamble. Stephanie is now publicly questioning your mental competence, which crosses a line from family dispute into potential defamation. What do you suggest? A final meeting. All parties present. We lay everything on the table. The complete evidence of her plans, the legal reality of the current arrangements, and a path forward. Will she agree to such a meeting? When she understands the alternative is potential legal action for defamation, yes. 2 days later, we all gathered in James's conference room. Myself, Paul, Stephanie, James, and Stephanie's attorney, a sleek woman named Vanessa Richards. The tension was palpable as James opened the meeting. We're here to resolve a situation that has become unnecessarily acrimonious, he began, and to establish clear boundaries going forward. He proceeded to lay out in meticulous detail the evidence we had collected regarding Stephanie's plans. Emails to lawyers, inquiries to care facilities, notes about having me declared incompetent, all dated and authenticated. With each new piece of evidence, Stephanie's lawyer's expression grew more concerned. As you can see, James concluded, any legal challenge to Mrs. Marshall's arrangements would involve all of this becoming part of the public record. Additionally, Ms. Marshall's recent statements to various social contacts questioning her mother's mental capacity without medical evidence constitute potential defamation. Stephanie's lawyer leaned over to whisper something to her. Stephanie's face, already pale, lost its last hint of color. "What do you want?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. "Three things," I said, speaking for the first time. "First, you will cease all public comments questioning my mental capacity or suggesting Paul has manipulated me. Second, you will accept the legal arrangements I've made regarding the business without further challenge. Third, you will begin the process of rebuilding trust if you want any relationship with me or the business going forward." "And if I refuse," James answered before I could, "then Mrs. Marshall will be forced to take legal action to protect her reputation. Additionally, the evidence of your plans would be submitted to the relevant state authorities who oversee elder care and protection." Stephanie looked at her lawyer, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Fine," she said tightly. "I accept your terms." As the meeting concluded and everyone began gathering their things, I asked Stephanie to stay behind for a moment. When we were alone, I finally asked the question that had been haunting me. "Why, Stephanie? Why were you willing to go to such extremes?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. "You and Dad always acted like the business was some sacred trust. But to me, it was just money sitting there, potential being wasted. I saw what it could become, how much more successful it could be. At the cost of everything it stood for." She shrugged. "Business evolves. Sentimentality is expensive." I studied my daughter, this stranger wearing her face. When did money become more important than people to you, than family? Maybe when I realized that in your eyes the business would always come first, that Paul understood that world in a way I never could, and you valued that more than our blood connection. There was hurt beneath the anger, I realized. A hurt that went back further than I had recognized. "The business was never more important than you," I said softly. "But the values it represents, integrity, craftsmanship, treating people with respect, those are non-negotiable. Your father and I tried to instill those values in you. The business was just the vehicle." She finally looked at me, her expression complex. "It's too late for this conversation." "It's never too late, Stephanie. When you're ready to really talk, not about control or money, but about what matters. I'll be here." She gathered her purse and stood to leave. Don't expect that day to come anytime soon. As I watched her walk away, I wondered if I had lost my daughter forever. The legal battle was over, but the emotional wounds ran deep. Only time would tell if they could ever truly heal. 3 months passed like a slow-moving river of grief and adjustment. Paul formally took over day-to-day operations of the furniture business while I stepped into an advisory role. He proved himself more than capable, honoring all the values Richard had established while bringing fresh ideas that respected the core mission. Stephanie and Paul's separation became a formal, legal arrangement. They were living apart, moving toward divorce. She threw herself into her corporate career, rarely reaching out except for brief, perfunctory holiday texts. Paul occasionally shared updates about her from mutual acquaintances, a promotion at work, a luxury condo purchase downtown. But there was no real connection between us. On a personal level, I found myself rebuilding a life I hadn't expected. With Dorothy's encouragement, I joined a book club, took cooking classes, and even started volunteering at a local woodworking program for at-risk youth. Life continued, but the Stephanie-shaped hole in my heart remained unfilled. Then one rainy Sunday afternoon, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, there stood Stephanie, soaking wet and looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual confident edge. Wordlessly, I stepped aside. She entered, removing her wet coat and standing awkwardly in the entryway of the home she'd grown up in. "Would you like some tea?" I offered, falling back on the social niceties that can bridge even the most difficult gaps. She nodded, following me to the kitchen, where she sat at the familiar table while I prepared 2 mugs. The silence between us stretched uncomfortably until I placed the tea before her and took my own seat. "I got passed over for partner," she finally said, staring into her mug. "After everything I've done for that firm, all the accounts I've brought and the hours I've worked, they chose Jonathan Perez instead." I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. That must have been disappointing. Disappointing? She laughed bitterly. It was devastating. I've sacrificed everything for that career. My marriage, my relationship with you, any semblance of a personal life. I sipped my tea waiting. Something told me this wasn't really about her job. The managing partner took me to lunch afterward, she continued, to soften the blow, I guess. And you know what he said? That while my performance metrics were exceptional, the partnership committee had concerns about my people skills and ethical judgment. She looked up at me, her eyes suddenly vulnerable. Apparently, word got around about what happened with you in the business. In a community this size, I shouldn't be surprised, but I never spoke about it to anyone outside the immediate situation, I assured her quickly. I know, it wasn't you. She sighed deeply. It was me. My actions, my choices. The way I treated you, the things I was willing to do. This admission, so contrary to her previous defensiveness, took me by surprise. When the partner told me that it was like being doused with cold water, I suddenly saw myself through others' eyes, what I'd become. Her voice caught. What Dad would think of me now. The mention of Richard, so rare from her in recent years, made my heart ache. He would want you to find your way back, I said gently. Back to the values he tried to teach you. Is it too late? She asked, and for a moment I saw my little girl again, uncertain and seeking reassurance. It's never too late to choose a different path, I told her, to realign with what truly matters. She nodded slowly, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. I brought something. My lawyer advised against it, but I need to do this. She slid the folder across the table. Inside was a legal document relinquishing any future claims against my estate plans or business arrangements. I'm not contesting anything anymore, she said quietly. You were right about the business. It's Dad's legacy, not just an asset. I didn't understand that before. I closed the folder without looking further at its contents. The gesture meant more than the legal details. What will you do now? I asked. She looked uncertain. I don't know. My whole identity has been wrapped up in my career and status and achievement. I'm not sure who I am without that. I reached across the table and took her hand. You're Richard's daughter. My daughter. You come from people who value craftsmanship, integrity, and genuine connection. That's in you, Stephanie. It's always been there, just buried under other priorities. Tears filled her eyes. I've made such a mess of everything. Things can be rebuilt, I assured her. Relationships, purpose, meaning. They can all be reconstructed with enough care and patience. An idea began forming in my mind. One that would test both of us, but might offer a path forward. The business could use someone with your marketing skills. Not to change its core values, but to help share them with a wider audience. She looked up surprised. You'd trust me to be involved after everything. Not immediately in a decision-making capacity, I clarified. Trust has to be rebuilt gradually. But everyone deserves a second chance to find their way. What would Paul say? He must hate me after how I treated him. Paul understands redemption better than most, and he's always seen the good in you, even when you couldn't see it yourself. 2 weeks later, Stephanie started working at the furniture store in a junior marketing position, a humbling step down from her corporate executive role. She worked directly with customers, learned about the craftsmanship firsthand, and slowly began to understand what made the business special beyond its balance sheet. It wasn't always smooth. There were disagreements, setbacks, moments when old patterns threatened to reemerge. But gradually, something new and stronger began to take shape. A relationship based not on obligation or inheritance, but on shared values and mutual respect. 6 months after she started, Stephanie presented a marketing plan that honored the craftsmanship while finding new ways to tell the story of each piece. Sales increased, but more importantly, the soul of the business remained intact. One evening, as we closed the shop together, she paused beside a dining table Paul had designed, running her hand along its perfectly joined edge. Dad would have loved this piece, she said softly. Yes, he would. I agreed, feeling a warmth spread through my chest at her recognition. I understand now what you and Paul were protecting, she continued. It wasn't just about furniture or profit margins. It was about something deeper: integrity, purpose, creating things of lasting value. Your father used to say that we don't just build furniture, we build pieces that become part of people's stories. I reminded her. That responsibility requires a different kind of thinking than just maximizing returns. She nodded thoughtfully. I've been so focused on acquiring things, status, money control, that I missed the point entirely. The things that truly matter can't be owned or controlled. They have to be lived. As we walked to our cars, she hesitated before asking, "Do you think there's hope for me and Paul? To at least be friends again, if nothing else?" There's always hope when people commit to honesty and growth, I said. But that's a conversation for the two of you to have. The reconciliation process continued, not just between Stephanie and me, but within our entire extended family of employees, customers, and community. The business thrived, not despite holding to its values, but because of them. Paul and Stephanie eventually found a new professional respect for each other, though their romantic relationship was a chapter that had closed. As for me, I discovered that the real inheritance I had to offer wasn't the furniture business or financial assets. It was the understanding that family isn't defined by convenience or blood alone, but by shared values, mutual respect, and the willingness to grow through even the most painful challenges. Sometimes the family we choose proves more loyal than the family we're born with. And sometimes those we're born with find their way back to us, transformed by life's hardest lessons into the people they were always meant to become. The real inheritance isn't money or property. It's the values we pass on and the love that endures even when tested by greed. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have given your child another chance after such a betrayal? Or would you have closed that door forever? Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps me continue sharing these life lessons. Thank you for listening, and remember that it's never too late to rebuild what matters most in life.